Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this fourth session of the online training of climate resilience and inclusive cities. CRIC, the CRIC project, co-founded by the European Union. The fourth session is focusing on the topic of social inclusiveness. So inequality and poverty reduction. And this is going to be our topic during the next 1.5 hours. So before we start with the presentations and the presentation of the team, I would like to invite Asi Budyati, Regional Manager, UCLG ASPAC, to give us some words of introduction and welcome. Asi? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Didier. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this second day of CRIC training on sustainable urban design and development. I just want to share a bit back when this CRIC project is developed. So we had the idea to bring triangular cooperation between South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Europe. At that time, we feel that to connect 60 municipalities across the 3 regions in one event seems difficult. But yesterday, we managed to get more than 150 login ID with more than 200 registration for the session, which is really amazing considering this is actually our first training event. So yesterday I was managing the chat room all the time, and it was really interesting to read all the questions and comments from participants. Apart from the issue of sea level rise and forest fire, which is very much characteristic of Southeast Asian issues, the other issues raised by participants are actually quite similar regarding flood, decrease of green spaces due to urbanization, urban planning, urban farming, waste management, how to increase local participation, and strategy to sensitize local leaders to give more priority on climate resilience sector. And in responding to that, the European partners provided excellent presentations and constructive feedbacks. Few takeaway from yesterday's session, we could highlight a note from John on the importance to understand climate hazard and vulnerabilities that each city faces before we start the planning processes. And a reminder to all of us that climate action plan is a circular process that requires a long-term follow-up over time. Another very interesting quote from Martina Zubara, which I personally really like, that planning is about people and making sure that people live a happy, healthy life, while infrastructure is there merely to support the people. And the last quote from Eric Hubert, that is really relevant with Asian context on the importance of culture in urban development. Culture can contribute to economic development and jobs creation. Therefore, we should really start considering culture as an alternative to finance the city economy. As the organizer, this is exactly what we expect, that CRIC project could facilitate an active knowledge and sharing exchange between the 3 regions, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Europe. We hope that today we will see even more vibrant exchange. In this case, I would really encourage at least one representative from each country who hasn't spoken yesterday to voluntarily share your city experience and probably issues where we can discuss as learnings to others. I think I should stop here. Thank you very much for your participation in the second online training. I wish all of us have a very productive session. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Dhanyabad. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shazi. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to now invite Putra Dvitama. Can we have the next slide?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, okay, thank you, Didier.
For as a project, the CRIC coordinator project, to give also some words of introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Didier, for the time. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum, colleagues from Indonesia, Bangladesh. Namaste, colleagues from Nepal. So first of all, I would like to thank to the participant for joining the training program consistently. I am Putra Dwitama, the project coordinator for CRIC project at UCLG ASPAC. I am responsible for technical project implementation in the pilot cities. So also thank you to all CRIC partners, ISOCARP, for organizing this followable today training. This is a good start for the CRIC project because in 10 pilot city, particularly in Indonesia, we will implement the project, and the urban design or planning is a very important part of seeing whether the city can improve their quality or not. So hopefully after the training activity, the cities will get a new spirit to implement in practical ways, in particular to improve the well-being of their cities. As is well known that well-being is a measure for resilience concept itself. So just quick message from me, Didier, and their participant. Basically, we will not spend more time for this session, right? As Asi already highlight many things in her remarks, the expert explanation and discussion are more interesting part, where on the second day of the training, we hope that the participants can share more their question and thoughts and best practices so that other participants across country can learn from each other. And as a practitioner, we are also part of solution, right? And we also thank to the expert who brought insight into yesterday's session, and certainly today's session, which is related to spatial equality, poverty, and good governance. We know that these modules are relevant to the question how to improve the capacity of cities in terms of adaptation and mitigation, as well as to reduce their vulnerability. Like yesterday, also I would like to quote John Eklund from Eklund Planning Advisory, said that urban planning is basically to reduce the vulnerability due to climate impact by fulfill the basic needs of the community. And we agreed not to neglect the environment at the same time. So furthermore, the question is how, the human-centered and nature-based solution approaches can be applied in parallel and complementary each other in the planning process. So the last, regarding the planning process, I also would like to highlight measure of action at city level as well. We know that in the article of 3.4 of the UNFCCC from the Paris Agreement is stated policy and measure to protect the climate system against human-induced should be integrated with national development program. So the question is, this is the another challenge also, how cities face integrating climate action with appropriate process and measuring action as part of development program and activity. As you know that in the last session, John also mentioned that the mainstreaming is one of the approach in terms of climate action plan development planning. So as we know, currently there are no model or parameters provided to calculate the effectiveness of adaptation efforts. And in the other hand, we need action quickly to tackling the climate impact. And the last, the project or action level itself, Federico also present many example and good practices that need to adopt and improve. So in this opportunity, we encourage the cities and participants within the small action, but impactful and inspiring others. So that's all from me, Didier. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Putra, for your kind words. And I think it's very good, together with Asi, a very nice resume of the whole discussion we had yesterday. A very interesting thing. We have Mahak Agrawal. She's from India, founder and researchers, Special Perspectives. We have Milena Ivkovic. She's director of urban planning advisory teams at ISOCARP. And we have Chak Gal. He's a project manager and researcher at the ISOCARP Institute. And the first speaker of this session is Mahak Agrawal. She is going to talk about inequalities, social inclusiveness. And I would like to ask Mahak now to present the presentation after I'm explaining the program of this session. We would like to focus on the why, on the what, and on the how. So on the why, we will focus on motivation, background, theory, SDGs, and NUA, like we did yesterday. The what is going to be presented by Mahak on the case studies, best practices, and references, and the how on with Milena on the method, the approaches, and the tools. Can we have the next? So when we are talking about social sustainability, of course, this is part of the big system of the pillars of the sustainable development, social dimension, environmental dimension, and economic dimension, coordinated by the governance. We are talking about combining design of the physical realm with design of the social world. Infrastructure to support social and cultural life, talking about social amenities, systems for citizens' engagement, and space for people and place to evolve. So we are talking here about participation processes, we are talking about social systems, social infrastructure, about placemaking, etc. Related to the SDGs, we will talk here about four goals. The goal number 1, the goal number 5, 10, and 11. When we are talking about SDG 1, no poverty, and here we can see the indicators we were selecting from the SDG 1. We are talking about access to basic services. We are talking about tenure rights to land. So what is the question of land? We were discussing also yesterday. SDG 10 about reducing inequalities. It is related to the social, economic, and political inclusion. So we need to be more inclusive when we are talking about urban development. Then we have, of course, the SDG 11. I think yesterday we were talking a lot about the sustainable cities and also the affordable housing discussion. And we selected also 2 or 3 main points and articles from the new urban agenda, and the article 11 about the sharing a vision of cities for all. This is about the whole topic, no one left behind. This is the whole discussion we have related to development of cities. So quality of life for everybody, but also the new urban agenda is focusing on the social function and the right to adequate housing, universal access to safe and affordable drinking water and sanitation. That was also what we were discussed yesterday with the general access to infrastructure. Yes. And also the new urban agenda is mentioning very clearly the participation process. So we need a more clear civic engagement, participation of all, related to the sense of belonging, and of course the implementation of good and accessible public space. I think the quality of public space is here quite important. So I would like now to invite Mahak to present the topic of inequality, social inclusiveness, etc. Mahak?
Thank you very much, Didier, for setting the stage with the SDGs and discussion on SDGs. So moving forward from a discussion on SDGs, which raise a global call for leaving no one and no person behind, we move on to talk about inequality. More importantly, we ask that why inequality should matter to an urban practitioner or a decision maker. But before we discuss the why, we'll discuss in brief what equality, equity, or justice mean. To start off, equality aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to enjoy full and healthy lives. For example, giving each person same-sized boxes to watch a match beyond the fence. But equity aims to ensure that everyone aims for a fair distribution of opportunities and resources, keeping in mind that everyone has different needs and capabilities. Justice, on the other hand, can be considered as a scheme of law or the collective responsibility of a society that ensures that civil and human rights are preserved and protected for each individual, regardless of their income, age, gender, or any other capability. Based on the principles of equality, equity, and justice is the capabilities approach. While there are, can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Based on the principles of equality, equity, and justice, as I said, is the capabilities approach. It aims to say that there are different perspectives of, there are different perspectives of the capability approach, but the central idea is that each individual is different either in terms of capabilities or the physical, social, and psychological environment they are brought up in. Even when we provide similar resources, these personal differences can lead to differences in utilization of resources, functioning, and well-being. So in 2019, the Human Development Index report, can we move on to the next? Yeah. In the 2019 HDI report, these capabilities were identified as basic capabilities and enhanced capabilities. So basic capabilities aid participation and supporting oneself, but enhanced capabilities enable one to act as an agent of change. But transforming from basic capabilities to enhanced capabilities involves several social norms and breaking the barriers of power and several other imbalances. So in a sense, freedom to achieve well-being is a matter of what people are able to do, what they're able to be, and thus the kind of life they're able to lead. Coming back to the why, that is why inequality or justice or capabilities approach matter in an urban context, the answer begins with the recognition of human needs. In 1943, Maslow identified 5 hierarchies of needs. The basic needs include access to shelter, sanitation, nutrition, safety, and security. But next we have the psychological needs of love, belonging, and self-esteem. At the top of the pyramid, we have the self-actualization needs, which include freedom of thoughts, actions, and to practice one's own choice of spirituality and path of self-attainment. To sum it up, every human being has a right to the city. Can we move on to the next slide? So every human being has a right to city where they can live, work, play, and learn to the best of own capabilities. The city is thus a representation of humankind. But it is more than just a place for commerce, trade, and facilities. It's a place of mutual support, intellectual exchange, and self-realization. Next, I'll invite Jark to lead on with the next part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mahak. Yes, so we are talking now primarily over about the whole social sustainability part, but I think something which is very important to understand is that it's not competing in any way with the economic or the environmental dimensions, but in the optimal case, all of these are really going hand in hand. And we want to, it is again much more complex than what we could cover in 1 hour or 1.5 hours today, but we want to focus on a couple of key elements today, which we consider some of the most crucial to look at. And these are in particular housing, accessibility, places, and process. So if you remember the hierarchy of needs, at the bottom is shelter, it's a safety, it's a protected place where you can stay. So housing should always be at the forefront. If you do not have a safe place to stay, many other things should be secondary. Secondly, there's the accessibility. So that can mean a lot of different things. Accessibility will reappear in this presentation several times. The accessibility to housing itself, but also the accessibility to the city, to job opportunities, to to hospitals and so on. There are many different parts where this becomes very relevant. But thirdly, also places. And places, Elena will talk about it at the end also, how we can create good places, how we can make places. But places are important in our daily life everywhere. It doesn't need to be a design place. Places are everywhere around us, and this is what the city is. This is more or less everything, which is not the infrastructure or the built environment. Everything in between at least can be one. And this is where we live. Therefore, there is a very, very strong focus on that. And then you have many overlaps, for example, between the green spaces in the city and the nature-based solution as presented yesterday by John and Federico. So everything is quite well interconnected. And these are the three main elements we want to talk about, but then we also have the process. So how do you get there? And this prepares a little bit the governance presentation, which will follow after this session. To start with housing, what means adequate housing, as it also is referred to in the New Urban Agenda. And UN Habitat made a list of 7 minimum criteria for adequate housing a couple of years ago. And these are primarily tenure security. That means that you have the right to stay at a certain place and that you cannot be forcefully evicted, or that you also can choose a little bit where you can live. So this discusses a lot the topic of formality, informality, which we were touching upon yesterday. The second one is services and infrastructure, which is, I think, quite clear to understand. It is, we need water, we need electricity, we need roads in some cases to get to our places. So any kind of infrastructure which supports our being. The third one is affordability. Affordability is very difficult to define because it depends really for every different kind of the society of every different country, what means affordable housing. And I think it's a problem which we are facing everywhere in the world. But affordable in the end means that everybody should be able to afford housing of any kind, or of some kind at least, without having any other limitations in other parts of their day-to-day life. So they need to be able still to pay for groceries or whatever, and not need to be able to make a choice between housing and something else. Then it needs to be habitable, and that is something which again can be defined in many different ways. But one of the key elements here is that it's a place which is not just, which I think most of these elements are about. Housing is more than just 4 walls and a roof. It needs to be a place which is safe, which is protected against, which is not just the roof protecting you against the rain, but which is also protecting your material belongings, which are protecting your family and yourself from heat, from any kind of external impacts, and needs to be a place which is habitable for you. Accessible means in this case, not where it is necessarily in the city, but the fact that it is accessible to everyone. And that means that any vulnerable group or marginalized groups, all of them have access to housing, and there's no discrimination in any sense in this way. While location goes much closer to the initial description of accessibility. So your place needs to be at the one time, or the place where you live needs to be at a place where you have access to the city, but also in a safe location. And I think we were touching upon that yesterday with, for example, flood-prone areas or riverbanks and so on. So a location which is not safe is not an adequate housing location. Either you have to be able to protect it, or you need to retreat it, referring back to John's presentation yesterday. And lastly, and often forgotten, if you remember, if you were with us yesterday, you remember the images from shown by Martina of some housing developments in the outskirts of the city, where you just had more or less the same buildings, the same architecture as you find everywhere in the world, without any consideration of the cultural identity. So cultural adequacy means that we need to take into consideration where we are building housing projects, that they are not just replicated from A to B everywhere in the world, but that they take into consideration how people are using their space, how they're using their houses, what kind of utilities they need. And these are minimum criteria. So just having all of these does not mean that it is necessarily a good housing project, but it is already a lot and very difficult to achieve, which I think most of you know very well. But then the question is, of course, always how to make that work. And I want to focus here on 3 different general approaches. The first one is being the financing, which of course is always a fundamental problem. The second one is how different kind of policies are able to contribute. And lastly, also how design can contribute to housing programs. And as said before, we will not be able to cover a lot. So this is really just a quick introduction and overview to some of the topics. But I would like to start with the financing part and continue with one of the videos we have been watching yesterday already from Martin Smolker, who is the Senior Fellow and Director of the Program on Latin America and the Caribbean, the Lincoln Institute. And this is part of the UN Habitat Uni Global Urban Lectures. And the full link is also available in the presentations, which will be shared afterwards. But I will just show a small part and some of the tools which all deal with the idea of capturing the value which land already has. I think Federico was talking about it yesterday as well. So how do we tap into the potential and the value of land which is created in the cities, which then can be used for social housing projects, for example. There's no way of summarizing all the work which the Lincoln Institute is doing in this field. So I really recommend you also checking out the link and the website which we are providing there, because they have a lot of reports on different regions and countries in the world. And there's a range of different tools. So every time when the discussion comes up with there's no money to finance for things, we have to look really at all the money and the value which is there and which is created on a daily basis, more or less. So of course it's a quite complex part, and it is not something which can always just be done on the local scale in the city. But there are many ways of paying, for example, for housing, or of getting cost investments for infrastructure back from developers and from people who are owning land in that area. But so this is was a quick overview of some of the tools. Then something else which goes more into the policy direction is something which is called the Quota of Solidarity. And this is from the Sao Paulo master plan from a couple of years ago. So they have a policy that every development which has more than 20 square meters of total built area needs to donate at least 10% of its built area for social housing, which means you have this diagram here. On a local property, you can just add, if you have 10 floors more or less, you add one more floor, and you do not need to pay Brazil has certain laws where you have to pay for the FAR and so on, as Martin was talking about before. But you do not need to pay extra for these. So they don't count. They come on top of what you already have. And you can do it on your local property. You can do it in another place, somewhere close by, or you can donate land. So if you have land somewhere else or just next to it, you just say, okay, I give someone else this kind of land, and you can do a social housing, or you have to do a social housing project on that. And lastly, you can also simply donate 10% of the land value for social housing land. But I think in most cases, they're using one of the other ones, because it's also a way, again, to generate income, because they're not losing the money. It's an investment as well. And this has been contributing a lot to the housing stock in Sao Paulo. And lastly, I want to talk about design. And there are million of different designs for social housing projects, and they vary from country to country. But there are a couple of different approaches which don't depend much on policies or anything, but are dependent on the architects and planners who are behind it. And one example, which is my favorite, is from Alejandro Aravena, who is the architect from Chile, and his company of Elemental. And they had several cases where they were hired after a disaster or major flood or hurricane. And they were approached and said, okay, we need housing. We need to build a large number of buildings now in order to accommodate the people who have been displaced. And they try to find out how much they need and how much they can provide. And it was a very simple calculation. If you build complete houses, full houses, let's say you can do 1,000, but if you only build half a house, you can build twice as many. Not necessarily, because it doesn't work completely like this, but you can build much more parts of houses than a full house. And in Southern America, and I believe in Indonesia probably as well, a lot of construction is self-built. So a lot of people are building with their family, with neighbors, with people they know. So people are used to building themselves. And therefore, what they did is they built the structure, as you can see here on the left side. You have the core, where you have all the facilities, let's say the bathroom, the kitchen, and one place to stay. And everything else stays just as a structure. And then over time, everybody can adapt it how they want. So they can fill in the gaps in between themselves, or when they have money at a later point. So it grows slowly over time to become a much more spacious place. And this has been doing quite a big contribution in several Southern American countries. But as said, there are many different ways of doing it. But this, I particularly like this because it shows the power of small things sometimes, and how a little idea can contribute in a very large scale. Moving to the second element of accessibility. So accessibility means access to the city and everything which constitutes the city. What that is, I will talk about in a moment, but in many places you have a very centralized approach. So here you have, for example, the access to jobs. And as closer you are to the center, as more access to jobs you have. This is the typical case for very monocentric cities. However, you also have a lot of places where you have polycentric structures. So that is, then it's not such a circular structure, but you have a lot of different places also with different typologies. But in most cases, as more central you are, as more access you have, which also means that a lot of times when social housing projects are done somewhere in the outskirts where there's no connection to the public transport, then you are taking away the access from people, mostly if you're relocating them from a central place to the outskirts, which is happening, I think, everywhere around the world. And then it doesn't need to be just this central model. It can also be a little bit different. And therefore, I would like to refer to this study from Sutam Ashari Mufti, who did a study on the access to public transportation in Jakarta. So you see 4 different layers here. You see the public transportation stops, which means every little dot in here is one public transport stop in Jakarta. Then he took a 700-meter distance and said 700 meters is an acceptable distance you can walk to public transport. How much is covered? And this doesn't mean that all of this has the same quality, because sometimes you are right next to a transport hub, another time you're just close to a bus station, but at least you are connected in one way. And then he overlaid that with the global human settlement layer, which is a global database of the population density, looking at the density in each place. And what you see if you overlap it is that there are some places which are not connected, but there are no people. Let's say it's an industrial area or something like this, so it's fine. But there are other places where you have a lot of people living there, which in many cases are not necessarily the rich. So you can also have very central places within a city which are not accessible. So it's not just about the distance from the center, it's also how things are connected. But then what do you need to have access to? And something I talked about a bit before already is the access to opportunity. So access to opportunity means, most importantly, jobs, but also can be to markets, can be to schools, universities, to transport, any kind of agglomerations, to visit other people, or to fulfill other kind of functions. So this is really the most important one, because this is something you have to do every day. Most people go to job every day, 6-7 days a week. So this is something which we have to do on a daily basis, and we have a loss of, depending on the country, quite significant part of the GDP is lost because people are stuck in traffic. And if you have been in Jakarta, for example, well, I think it's the same in many other countries. You have traffic which takes you hours and hours to get in the city or outside the city. So this is something which goes for the social quality, because it's not just the opportunities you have, it's also the time you have for yourself, for your family, for to learn other things and so on. But it also has a very strong economic value. So these things are once again interconnected very strongly. Secondly, you have the access to amenities, and amenities can mean everything from pharmacies, doctors, hospitals, public offices, stores, food, anything which you need, not necessarily on a daily basis, but on a regular basis. So you need to be able to go to a public office, for example, to take care of registrations or of any kind of other businesses, or to a post office and so on. So these are elements which need to be somewhere around there. And we had it yesterday already a little bit with the TOD, the transit-oriented development, which we'll talk about in a bit as well further. So a lot of times you can put all these things together in a central place, so people can reach it easily from different places, but also when they are moving through. And lastly, and something which is often forgotten in the accessibility, is the access to the city. Because again, we are not talking about just an economic, we're not talking, even if Martina made the comparison to a CEO, a city is more than a big company. A city is a place where we live, where we spend our lifetime. Most people are staying in one city the majority of their life. They build everything there. So you need to be able to use and access the city as well. And that goes from being accessible for the elderly, being accessible and safe for children, having a sense of urbanity where you can do a lot of different things, having access to places such as parks or squares and so on. So there's much more to the city than just the jobs and hospitals, and all of these have to be considered. And then, transit-oriented development now, or TOD, was referred to several times, and I think many of you know it because Indonesia is working a lot on it at the moment. It is in a very simple idea, you have a network of stations, of transport hubs, and around these, normally with a hierarchy, and around these transport hubs, you have a commercial core or really densified core, some other facilities such as public spaces, but also, for example, public offices. And then as further you go out, as lower the density goes. And normally you have the cores itself, but you also have linear development, which goes a little bit into the discussion from Eric yesterday about development corridors. So you have a linear development in different directions, and in many countries in the world, you have already the limitation that development, at least large-scale development, can only happen along these corridors. But the best way to show this is actually an example from Jakarta. I believe it is the first TOD which became functional, say, in Jakarta, the Duku Atas. I assume some of you have been there for sure. I had the chance to see it last year as part of our Congress in Jakarta, and you see a little bit what I was talking about. So you have a transport hub in the middle, which combines a lot of different things. You have the airport train coming, you have the metro, you have the BRT, you have a lot of different buses and coming from different places, and then you have a lot of motorcycle taxis, and maybe there will be even a kind of water transport coming as an additional layer. So the fact that this one was defined as a TOD increased the value of all the surrounding land many times. So it doesn't look like this yet. It looks already partly like this. So some of the developments are already done, but this brings in a lot of money in this part. So a lot of this project can be funded by the increased land values which are created. And you see this density, the clustering of all of offices, of residential places really, really densely around it. But just to go a little bit further into what TODs are and what it is or what it needs to work, and how they can contribute also to the economic prosperity, but also to the accessibility to the city. I will play a short video from Sebastian Gotthals, who is a board member of ISOCARP and the director for technical assistance, as well as the director and founder of CityLinks Group, which is doing large-scale TOD development in Asia and in Africa.
How can TOD, or transit-oriented development, contribute to increased economic prosperity? Well, first of all, common characteristics of TOD include urban density, compactness, and mixed-use development close to mass transit facilities, such as bus rapid transit, light rail transit, or heavy rail transit. Integrated with a good quality of public spaces near stations, which are walkable and bicycle friendly. Our cities now are mostly shaped by tertiary and services economy, so their social and economic development will increasingly rely on accessibility, travel speed, convenience, and connectivity. So now a successful TOD policy is key to encourage shorter distances of commuting with much less dependence to motorized vehicles and traffic congestion. So this is why TOD is so benefitable for a healthy urban economy and more livability and prosperity for the people. So the question is, which elements are crucial for its success? Well, I would say first, plan TOD together with polycentric urban development upfront, because integrated mass transit investments are essential drivers of decentralized spatial development, especially when they are planned ahead of spatial growth, and not just being a side effect of investing in infrastructure after economic growth has been secured. Sometimes it's just too late. So see, for example, how Tokyo planned ahead its 8 metropolitan subcenters along the Yamanote railway line. Or maybe to mitigate this case, on the other hand, Guangzhou in China used its BRT project as a lever of tactical TOD in the city center by reconnecting and densifying urban activities along one main corridor. And on the contrary, if you check Bogota's BRT, it was designed as an infrastructure project only, with a very poor integration in its urban context, and was not really designed for pedestrian connectivity between stations and urban activities or public spaces. Second factor of success, finance TOD by using land value capture, or LVC. Well, everybody knows that high capital-oriented projects, such as mass transit, involve large and upfront investments. So a sustainable investment model is needed to achieve such TOD projects. And land value capture is a potential solution. It's a public funding method by which government or their agencies can successfully fund major transit initiatives and eventually implement TOD. Well, so the first principle is to generate a rise in land values by initiating and planning infrastructure projects and improve accessibility for all. Then municipalities have to manage to retain part of the added value generated by the planned transit networks on the lands. And then they can use this land value capture, LVC, to finance planned infrastructure investments. So if you check this, value capture through TOD is a kind of virtuous cycle in which many good projects can be delivered, releasing multiple benefits to the stakeholders, also the people, and by inciting those beneficiaries to make a good financial contribution to the project, which is actually much smaller than the benefits they will receive in the end. And the third factor of success is it's more like a human factor. It's very important to consider it as an urban planner. It's to associate TOD with walkability, public space or placemaking, and a healthy intermodality. So as you saw, you compare the case between Guangzhou and Bogota, TOD cannot be reduced to the association of urban density and mass transit infrastructure. To succeed, it is essential to integrate mass transit projects in a walkable context where people have a quick and smooth access to public spaces, shops, services, or mixed-use buildings. And moreover, a healthy intermodality associating the use of public transport with cycling, walking, and micromobility using human-centered infrastructure is a major factor of success of TOD. So I really believe that Indonesian cities should definitely identify how and where to implement TOD policies using not only mass transit, but also sustainable mobility planning as a tool for accessibility for all and for a prosperous and healthy economic development.
Yes, so he was mentioning, or he was linking a lot of different concepts which we were talking about before already, such as the intermodality, such as the land value capturing, but he also highlighted the importance of small scale connectivity. And that one important part is walkability, which seems to be a little bit difficult to translate to Indonesian. But the idea is very simple, that you need to be able to walk, and it is quite challenging and dangerous in some Indonesian cities sometimes to walk from one place to another. There are two cases, for example, in Jakarta, you have a traffic light just very close to Duku Atas, which was counting down the numbers, and every second for the green period of the traffic light for pedestrian was 3 times shorter than the red one. So you saw as a pedestrian that the cars are just 3 times more important at least. So it's very difficult to go from one place to another. Also in Bogor, if you walk around the presidential palace, you can barely cross from one place to another because everything is fenced off, so people are not walking on the streets. So walkability is very important because it is the most sustainable way of getting from A to B. And as long as you have a functional city, you can go from one place to another without ever taking any kind of transport, because maybe you live and work and do everything in your neighborhood. And I think kampungs, for example, work like this. So there are different concepts, the 5-minute or the 15-minute city, depending on how you look at it, but it should be, everything important should be close to you. And it can be a public transport stop which brings you somewhere else, but at least things need to be around you. It needs to be safe. You need to be able to safely go from one side of the street to another or pass on a street. It needs to be comfortable, which depending on the climate becomes very relevant and links back to nature in the city and so on. But it also needs to be attractive. You don't just want to walk by a big street where you don't only see cars, but you want to have things which are happening left and right. You want to have interaction, and there needs to be much more to it than just a safe place. And then you have places. I will not talk too much about it because Milena and a short video afterwards will discuss more. But generally speaking, you have green places, you have public places, you have safe places, and you have places which are providing a sense of identity. So that can be a place where you do festivals. And we had this question yesterday on events, how events can contribute to the economic prosperity, for example. Events can contribute to economic prosperity, but don't just put them inside an event center outside the city. Put them inside the city. Put them where you can expand on the streets, where you can involve places. In Jakarta, you have the car-free day in one of the main streets, where you see how everybody comes together. There's so much informal and formal economy there. It's a place of culture and of people. So all of these things can contribute a lot as well. And then just very quickly, I would introduce Greg Muse, who's the director of the Urban Synergies Group and also teaching at the Queensland University in Australia. And he has been researching the topic of public places around the world for many, many years. And he will just quickly talk about key elements of public space.
My name is Dr. Greg Muse, and today I'd like to present you and answer 2 questions. What are the key elements of a good public space? And secondly, which tools can be used to develop a good public space? I'd like to share with you 2 quotes that inform the definition of what we're dealing with here. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. That highlights that no matter what we are dealing with in an urban environment, the first and foremost and most important thing is we have to enable equitable environments where everybody who takes part as part of the city making process can be heard and can make a meaningful contribution. So in this case, a public space is a space available to people for all ages where they can meet every day socially and comfortably. These spaces are safe, accessible, free of cost, inclusive, free of discrimination, enjoyable, and encourage idea sharing. Such spaces will contribute to our collective well-being. So my own research is that we really have to understand and even go beyond the aesthetics and the functions of a public space and really look into the dynamic production process which is going on by the human condition, which informs materiality, and have to take that into consideration as well. So with that in mind, the first qualities of a great public space are user integration, public space itself, the minimum density, livability of a space, The buildings that define the space rather being set in space is very important, and the existence of many rather than fewer buildings. That shows you the diversity that is very important. Further, based on all these informations on hand, there's an assessment framework for quality experiences and dynamic natures of public space. And that is literally an amalgamation and a testing of all these knowledge which we have accumulated before. Then we really have to understand first the conditions of a public space, the preconditions before we come in and design something. The urban density, we have to understand how many people really live there and what are the possibilities to bring people together to enjoy a shared common experience. The buildings, that includes understanding of the variety of their functions, the vertical orientation of their facades, the well-functioning hybrid zones, as I mentioned before, supportive signage, a flexible building heights, and that the 4-meter mark really matters, and flexibility in land use. Places for people to walk, engagement opportunities at eye level with a focus on public space. That includes literally the notion of having quality seating available, having good access to food nearby, good water for pleasant microclimates, particularly when we're dealing and designing in tropical environments. Trees cover for pleasant microclimates. We know the cooling effect, particularly with climate change, it's a very important component. Then the street, that comes back to air pollution and noise level, as even the volume of traffic, how we can create a comfortable microclimates for people. And it all manifests into the space impression on eye level. That impression comes back to you as a qualified designer and planner, as much as it comes back to the user experience and the perception of this space from all these users. And again, maintenance is a very important one because it triggers something in people to come together, as well as in the wind and sun conditions. With that in mind, I'd just like to finish my contribution with what we had this created co-designed public space manifesto, what it really means for us. So we outlined certain attributes what public spaces really must constitute. And again, it comes back to the definition what I shared with you at the beginning, that there must be inclusive, safe, and accessible to all. And then it goes on to how it has to reflect values of a culture where people wish to experience something in an inclusive manner.
We also have them in the references, which are linked in the presentations and so on. So you can also see some of the materials which you referred to. So lastly, I just quickly want to go through a couple of approaches and how to get there. And as you might see, I would like to talk much more about several of these topics because there's just so much connected to it, but unfortunately we have limited time. So I try to just cover a couple of other parts briefly. Firstly, it's the way we plan. Traditionally, we have a master plan. A master plan is resource intensive, it's inflexible, and in many cases, a master plan is already outdated before it is approved because it takes so long until it is prepared, and it is so inflexible that in the moment it is actually politically approved. The circumstances changed already. So this doesn't work. This doesn't work with the pace of our cities, with the pace of development. We need something which is much more strategic, integrated, which connects different parts. We will talk about it in the governance session afterwards about the integration across horizontal and vertical dimensions. But it also needs to be visionary, as referred to by Eric yesterday, for example. It needs to be adaptive and needs to be able to grow with the city. So we need to change the way we plan. And most important, also going back to the environmental session, it is a circular process. It always goes around and around. You have to understand and listen. You have to co-create and plan, implement and monitor, and review and repeat, and always more or less do the same thing over and over again. It's not you plan once and wait for 10 years and see how far you can implement it and then review it. No, you do it really on I wouldn't say a daily basis, but on a very repetitive basis. You always check what we try to do. Did we think what we want to do, is it the right thing to do or not? Listening and understanding can be done through many different ways. I was showing the example of the accessibility before. You have a lot of data nowadays, and I know that Indonesia has a vast amount of data from all the users. You have apps for everything. You have the mobility data from all the different people. You have a lot of companies who are working in this environment. So there's a lot of data available, which helps you to understand. You have the SDGs and a lot of different ways of monitoring the SDGs. And you also have citizen engagement, many different ways how you can get people involved and listen to what they think. So this picture, for example, is from BERKURANGNYA, where we had a workshop last year as well. So you can, connecting to people is one of the most valuable things, because you do not know always how, I know how I use the city, but I do not know how you use the city. Everybody uses it in a different way, and we need to listen to everyone to understand really what the challenges are. Secondly, the co-creation and planning. So it's not just you sit down, you make a plan and you approve it. No, you have to engage, you have to design, you have to activate, accelerate, and support. And this one will be one of the references as well. So I don't talk too much about it now, but this is the framework developed as part of, from the city of Trondheim in Norway, as part of one of the projects we are working on. It's the Bold City Vision framework, and it goes through a lot of different tools which can be used for each of these stages and all the different areas which you're working on, from policy development to citizen engagement and so on. But we will share these references with you. And lastly, the implementation and evaluation. So you need to create an environment where innovation can take place. You need to plan for the unplanned. I think Milena will talk about it as well. And there are other things such as participatory budgeting, where you give a small choice to for certain projects to the citizens, and they can say, well, I would like to have something like this, and this is for me much more important. So it's a very direct way of getting feedback from the society. One example for the innovation environment as part of the project, Positive City Exchange, the same as the other one as well. We are having the idea of the innovation playground developed by Space Engagers from Ireland, which is a dedicated area in the city, which you deregulate up to a certain point, depending on what you're trying to achieve, and you use it to test all the ideas you have. If you don't want to do it on a city scale and you don't want to make it a new plan for everything, you take one part and say, okay, let's try if this works. And then you have the area delineated itself. You have one central place, a city lab or an urban lab, innovation lab, however it's called, which brings together all the people, which brings together stakeholders from the private sector, academia, and so on. And then you can there experiment and see if it works. And if it works well, you expand it, you do it in other places as well. If it doesn't work well, you know that it didn't work well. And this does not only happen in the physical environment, but also in the virtual environment. So that goes together with any kind of data management, open data, open governance, and so on. And that is the last from me. I will now introduce the last video, and afterwards my colleague Milena Evkovic will continue. So we have one of our senior members, Joanie Silias from South Africa, who has been working actively with communities in South Africa to activate places, and she is talking about her work on place leadership.
We see a lot of towns in South Africa that are almost collapsing. Kolini was a perfect opportunity for us to showcase what can be done in terms of us working together with the business community, with everybody. We don't necessarily have to rely on government, we can do it ourselves and in partnership with everyone.
The lecturer said to the class, this is what Kolini looks like now. Go and think of what you think the community can do to change it.
They arrived this morning at the bus, all excited and ready to come paint and to come transform Kolini. And it's all voluntary. There's no assignments or marks or anything connected to this day. And they were all excited to join in and to come make a difference. And I think it's such a good story to tell, to say we've got a young generation that is really willing to put in their own time and effort to change a town for the better. And that is actually what we need in our country. The students realized that they have a very valuable role to play in the broader community.
In terms of urban ecology, we really focus on the smaller and the medium-sized cities because they will grow, because there's quite an increase in urbanization worldwide. From a planning and also an ecological point of view, we would like to become involved in more projects all over South Africa in terms of smaller and medium-sized cities.
By fixing one's community, can one also inspire investment to come here? That with these efforts, by mobilizing investment in the right places, by mobilizing community efforts in the right place, South Africa can come together and become a more prosperous and more successful country.
The most important lesson that can be learned from it is that we should never underestimate the power of a small change. My name is Milana Ivkovic. My expertise is public space and civic participation. I work as well as a director of urban planning advisory teams. I will tell you something shortly about placemaking. Placemaking is a very efficient tool to improve public space and to also touch upon all the topics we have here so far, from the mobility and from climate change to the housing affordability and equity. I would like to start with a few quotes. The first quote I really like in the process of placemaking, where a lot of people ask me what placemaking is that the mark of a great city isn't how it treats special places like presidential palaces, but how it treats its ordinary ones. So placemaking stands very close to the neighborhood, to the street, and to the daily life. If I will have to explain placemaking and improving public spaces through placemaking, I would say placemaking is mainly the use of existing tools, assets, and most of all, creative capacities of the neighborhoods itself to improve public space and everyday life. Usually when we start talking about placemaking, when we want to initiate a placemaking project, there are a lot of questions about what is it, but how big impact placemaking can reach. To answer this question, it's important to understand two things, and those are how to scale up the impact of placemaking, because the impact can be as big as we want. A lot of colleagues before already mentioned that the power of massive small change is very important. It doesn't have to be always very big designed projects. Small projects can contribute to a lot of change. And another important thing is how to start a good placemaking project, because placemaking can also strand in a lot of, let's say, roadblocks, and at the end, because of the lack of funds or because of the lack of commitment, we don't get the desired impact that we would like to have. There are several points which are essential to have the placemaking process to make a placemaking process a success. We have to understand that placemaking is not dominated by one sector only, it's balanced between different sectors. The government role is very important because we work with communities most of the time. We know that the communities have the energy and the network, but we need to support them, and through placemaking and making through of social public spaces projects, we can definitely tap into that. The government should play this supportive role, but also the non-profit organizations such as ours, as ISOCARP, and also other professional non-profit organizations working in different cities, initiating different pilot programs are very important. Let's move to the next one. I will showcase 3-4 approaches about on placemaking. Placemaking is never a standalone project in the city. It's a process that combines different other topics and issues, and it needs to be embedded. In this particular case, I have worked together on using, together with partners in China, in the city of Suzhou, to use placemaking and the heritage of the city as a way to improve public space. We looked through the placemaking process, we looked into the past and the present and the future of the city. We took into account the ambitions that both city municipal government and and the local neighborhoods expect from their city. And finally, we focused on several issues of several locations within the city, which have some kind of public space degradation, and with placemaking we transformed it into much better places. Let's go to the next one. We have seen a lot of transformation coming in the realm of placemaking happening in the last couple of months with the COVID crisis. I have to say that in a way the COVID crisis has accelerated the value of placemaking, and we see that what used to be a small intervention, like you see here on the left side of the slide, what used to be seen as a guerrilla intervention in public space to show that the certain degraded streets can be better, to give a critique on the too much of parking lots. We see that those actions are now becoming more and wide reality. In the right side of the slide, you see not just one parking lot, but the whole street was really freed of the parkings in the way like it was being done a couple of years ago with just the simple actions. Now those simple actions are transforming whole streets, and placemaking suddenly becomes much more influential. Let's move to the next one. When I was talking about the value of placemaking, I usually, when I explain what it is and how can it improve public spaces, I usually get questions from audiences or from potential or from municipal services saying like, yes, okay, that's all very nice, and you want to involve culture and heritage, and you want to involve people in transforming parking lots maybe, but how can it be used for more, let's say, long-lasting and not only temporary urbanism, but long-lasting changes in our city? In a project in Durban, in South Africa, we did that. We looked into the placemaking as a tool to support area development, to support local real estate developers who now have certain properties in the city, in the inner area of Durban, and they're reluctant to develop them further because they have no trust in the market or no trust in the city planning. But it's the way we presented several ideas is to really unlock the potential and show them that they can actually not only earn money but contribute to the municipality and contribute to the urban life of the city, of the whole inner city of Durban. There are several of those recommendations about how to use placemaking and to support area development. There are a lot of groups within our network working on that particular area, looking for the financial models to use placemaking to as a part of incremental urban development. So you can find all those informations also back to on our websites and in our publications. So let's move forward to the last case study. I think that one may also be a very illustrative for a lot of Southeast Asian context. This one is actually started as a placemaking action, but it has much more important effect, and it connects with climate change, with waste management, and with revival of communities. This particular example is coming from Myanmar, from the capital city of Yangon, where in a couple of last years, there have been really a lot of support for the transformation of public spaces, which have been degraded in many ways. If I have to conclude on this particular chapter on the value of placemaking and how to use placemaking as a tool for different urban planning processes, this would be one of the most beautiful examples that combines problem solving, direct problem solving, like in this area, which was obviously waste management, with the upgrade of the community, communal space, with the upgrade of the streets, and bring back the value of everyday life to the neighborhood. again, as a conclusion, I already mentioned, we are looking into the placemaking from many different perspectives. We, within the urban planning advisory teams, we try to also combine different tools to involve designers and placemakers and the communities on the ground. So we value very much the so-called co-design process. So we organize a lot of design charrettes, workshops, and makeathons. Now we are moving to online version of that. And to go a bit deeper into how we do it, also in these times of COVID, when we are not being able to do things on the ground. The examples I have showed you, but also the work I'm doing in Rotterdam, is, for instance, has to do with a lot of actions in the ground. So we involve people in the placemaking. Placemaking is a very integrative process. We are using a lot of tools such as design charrettes, which are very simple ways to express the ideas of the neighbors of the neighborhood through working with them on the ground. Usually the design charrette is 3 to 5 days, but now we are looking into a bit more longer trajectories, including placemaking, and that's the City Lab, when we are really focusing on not only just a simple consultation and talking with all the stakeholders, but looking also into the phase of implementation and advisory, how to improve the public space with placemaking. Let me then just conclude on this by including our inviting our ISOCARP Young Planning Professionals workshop participant, Mr. Siddhartha Kakar, who is now working with ECOM in Hong Kong. He's an urban designer, co-founder, and also design analyst, to give his presentation and his view on this issue. Thank you so much.
Hi all, I'm Siddharth, and together with Ruve, Yulia and Diane, we recently managed to create and put together the YPP bus publication for Jakarta and Bogor workshop we had in September 2019. It's sort of a publication that summarizes all the projects, proposals, ideas, experiences we had during the 4 or 5 days of the workshop. And I really just want to take this opportunity and put it out there in the public domain on behalf of the team and see what kind of feedbacks we get from the larger audience. It all started off with this famous batik prints of Indonesia that stitches the entire country together. It's sort of that one visual element that is so striking in every sense, with its countless patterns and colors and textures, making it so appealing and enticing to work with. So that's how we sort of came up with the bus publication, but we also had some facts to keep in mind at the same time. It was the second largest ISOCARP workshop, first one being in Asia. So we wanted to make sure we add that cultural element to it and make it bilingual as much as possible to appeal to the wider local audience. This was one of the first rough draft that Ruve was very kind to create to set us in motion towards the final product. And this being the final outcome of it, with planning beyond limits as a theme of the workshop and the Congress. We really wanted to extend this idea of limitlessness into the entire publication as much as we could, really, with Tale of Two Cities being set up by Ruve, fantastically done, setting up Jakarta and Bogor, and then the two sites of Duku Atas in Jakarta and Surya Kencana in Bogor. I want to invite you to go through all the projects and ideas that we had. We've also included some experiences of people and participants into the publication. And then eventually at the end, I wanted to sort of reveal this mystery of all the colors and patterns that were going on in this entire report. Yeah, that's it really. I really do hope you enjoy reading the publication as much as we have enjoyed creating it and Yeah, as much as we've enjoyed creating it, the publication and the projects as well, and the experience that we had in the workshop and the Congress, we do look forward to your feedbacks and opinions on the publication as something that we can learn from and implement it further in our next projects or publications. Thank you.
So I think that we are now done with all the presentations, and we have 3 questions for all of you. This comes additionally to the questions we had in the chat also. So the 3 questions are, what are you doing in your cities towards social sustainability? Where do you see the biggest challenges? And who are most vulnerable and how are they integrated? These are questions you can simply put your answers or your replies or your ideas in the chat, but and do this like we did yesterday. Also, put your ideas and include this in the comments. But what I could see from the discussion we had in the chat just before, we can see a lot of questions related to the illegal settlements, and also what kind of policies can be developed related to informal and planned slum settlements, and also related to the question of gentrification, destruction of historical identity, what is about spatial equality in reducing poverty and environment. So I would like to ask the speakers, Mahak and Milena and Chuck also, if they can build on these questions and reply and give some elements to the questions. Mahak, maybe you're the first on the list.
Yeah, I'll start with the question of informality and illegality. So as we said throughout our presentation on equity and equality and justice, there's a very big difference between informality and illegality. The biggest problem that we face in incorporating the informal sector, whether it's the economic informality or the housing informality in urban fabric, is that we perceive these informal areas as illegal areas, whereas they're not really illegal areas. They basically do not have the right to tenure security. So for example, if I quote an example from India, in urban India, we have almost 30% of the population in urban areas, which is living in informal settlements. And the government has had for a long time a perspective of looking at these settlements as illegal settlements and pushing them towards the periphery of the cities. But we have also realized that that approach does not work. So the other approach that the government has adopted in urban areas is to build incremental housing, provide a site to the urban poor and start building incrementally. But then that has not been a good approach in many parts of India as well. So the other idea is like, let's bring and look at these informal areas as who are they catering to? What are the connections of these informal settlements to the surrounding in terms of where they're working, where they're living, and how they're basically moving around and accessing services in the surroundings. And the idea is to involve them in the decision making as well as a critical part of the city as a whole, not pushing them in the periphery or not denying them of the basic human rights to, say, adequate housing, water, or sanitation. So the first step, truly begins with accepting them as not the illegal settlements or people of the city.
Thank you so much, Mahak. I think it's very clear. So this is also the main key message of the New Urban Agenda. No one left behind. So this is exactly the point. So if you have illegal settlements, please involve the people in discussion and make it happen So maybe Milena, you have also, and this is maybe also related to the placemaking process. Can you switch on your mic, please?
Oh, the beginner's mistake, sorry. Okay.
No.
When we talk about, you know, the illegal settlements and placemaking, there are two things how placemaking can be part of either upgrade of the informal settlements, either trying to move from illegality to legality. The first one about the upgrading of the informality, it's, as we know, the informal settlements are highly dense. When we worked with informal settlements, the biggest not so much the fear, but the biggest wish, besides basic needs, of course, was also to have a place when the community can come together, because they do not have any place for that. Everything is so really cramped. So that's the placemaking can help in that sense, by really creating the openings, finding the right places, upgrading the existing streets, or just making new streets within informal settlements as social spaces, primarily as social spaces. That's the one point. The other point, when we were talking about moving from illegal to legal status, in terms of placemaking, it can help as a tool, again, to recognize who are the young leaders, or generally the leaders of the community, which are able to you know, mobilize others to follow this process of moving from illegality to legality, to be part of the dialogue. So it's very important to understand that this, as Mahak already sketched, drastic measures don't really work. Just evicting people, moving in, replacing them from A to B doesn't really work. Somehow they have to be recognized as a part of the city, and placemaking can help in that recognition process. So in that case, placemaking is a communication tool more than a spatial tool. So I can elaborate for hours on this. I hope it's enough to move to the next interesting questions.
Yes, thank you. Chuck, maybe you have also, can you add something to the process maybe?
Well, I think Mark and Milena raised the most important parts, and I think the important part is also just the choice of words, because it's not illegal, the people are not illegal, and they're also not informal. The place where they live, the tenure security, as Mark mentioned it, that is the only informal part. Everything else makes them part of the city, and this is a bit of a change of mindset which is needed. And I would again use a case study from Brazil in this case, and Martin was actually introducing one of them. It's a CPAC, but it's also something which is called the special zones of special interest, zones of special social interest, I think, in English. So there are places which are defined by the public body, and they say these are areas which we have to work with. And then they do different kind of things. They say, okay, these are areas where we definitely cannot have anybody living because they are dangerous due to flooding or whatever. So going back to what John was talking about yesterday. So they see these ones have to be removed. They have to be resettled. There's no other way. And then you are slowly taking one step after the other, taking a street, building it into it, providing some basic infrastructure, trying to relocate them either within the same neighborhood or in the very close vicinity, so they are not destroying the social networks. And a lot of that is funded through some of the taxation systems which they are using from development projects, for example, within the same area. So it all goes hand in hand quite well, and it works up to a certain point. Of course, it doesn't solve informality in itself, and I think there will be no solution for it anyway, but it does. It's this incremental step where they do one thing at a time and putting it as an integral part of the agenda, but also not seeing it as illegal.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Banjarmasin. So it's from the city, from Banjarmasin city, and it is related to old tradition or old urban structure, and well, also the relationship with the nature and with the water, and also the question of placemaking, how placemaking can in that sense, well, improve the situation of old city close to the river and close to the water. Maybe Milena, you can give some examples.
Yes, I will give examples. I saw the question coming into chat, and I said, yes, this is the one I want to answer. Thank you, Didier, too.
You're welcome.
Thank you for playing that ball to me. It's you know, it's the thing with placemaking is, of course, it's it can be used as a kind of initiation tool to really tackle long-term changes, because it can start really very small scaled. It can be implemented almost everywhere. You don't need large tractions of land, or, you know, a large communication big process to start with. When we talk about the legacy, whether it's a landscape legacy or it's a built heritage legacy, usually it's in terms of placemaking is we try to look into those values, but also to combine them with daily uses. So the built heritage and the landscape heritage should become living heritage, right? So it's not something that it's conserved, and placemaking does not serve as a tool for conservation. You should not see it as something like that. It's a very dynamic tool, and it also gives a possibility to open up a dialogue with those people inhabiting those areas, whether it's a natural or it's a built heritage landscape or combined landscape, and to integrate, to use placemaking as a catalyst to integrate water, nature-based solutions, green spaces, green areas, daily uses, daily markets, everyday life, to integrate it all together through public space. And that placemaking can be a catalyst for that. So you start with one little topic, maybe it's a market along the one of the river banks. Then you upgrade the riverbank, then you upgrade the next side of the riverbank, then you move to your waste management solution, then you move to building a whole new dike. So what can start as a small placemaking action of just putting a communal market somewhere strategically, tactically well in that neighborhood can initiate a snowball of positive changes. I hope that can be a case with the Banjarmasin city.
Yes, very good. We have also another, well, the challenge is also to that the people should leave and should get out from their comfort zones, right? And there is a question here from Samarinda, and I would like to invite Mr. Ali Suhardiman to take the floor, and please, if you can, well, pose these questions to the speakers, it will be very helpful, and invite you to shut on your to activate your video.
Okay,
Mr. Ali.
Okay, thank you, Didier.
You're welcome,
everyone. Yeah, my name is Ali from Samarinda City, East Kalimantan, Indonesia. So I have a question for Char and Mahak, maybe, to present about the social sustainability. So my short question is, what is the main modalities that city needs to provide all the element of social sustainability, like housing and also accessibility? If the answer is money, so I can say that our city is not rich enough. You mentioned or you exempling a lot of about the Jakarta, but for your information, that annual budget for Jakarta is 15 times higher than our city in Samarinda. So it's also become a barrier for the city, small city or medium city like Samarinda or maybe in another city in Indonesia. So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. Maybe we can start with Mahak. Would you like to address this question? Your mic, please.
Okay, sorry. So money would always be an issue in several cities, and especially if you're comparing the city with Jakarta. But there are also various innovative financing tools to generate that money. So as Chark mentioned in his PowerPoint presentation, and as the presenter was talking about the land value capture, there are various tools and techniques to work with different stakeholders in a city to generate that amount. And it does not have to be the sole responsibility of a government agency alone to generate that amount and to disperse that amount for various purposes.
Okay, thank you so much. I think Chuck wanted also to add something.
Well, one thing Mahak said is very relevant. There are tools how to generate money from different stakeholders, both external as well as internal, for example, from the private sector. But it will always be a challenge. There's not enough money to pay for every project which we would like to do in no place in the world. So it will remain a problem, but that shouldn't stop us to look into different opportunities how to generate more finances. But also I would refer back, I don't know if you were part of the presentations yesterday, but Federico Aidi was talking about the investment in the future. And this applies very well in this very same context as well, because everything you don't do today will most likely lead to costs tomorrow. So if you do something today, depending on what you do, you will save money in the future, either because you generate income through taxes or whatever, or you do not have expenses which you would have had otherwise. For example, let's say a poor informal city is not the best for the public sector because you don't get taxes for anything more or less. So there are many investments which will pay off. Then you just need to find the right financial institutions, more or less, which are supporting that, where there are also a lot, but then you really need to come up with the right frameworks. But it is something which can be made functional, at least up to a certain degree. And third, it is going back to what Milena was talking about. Small changes can lead to a lot. So you don't need to say, okay, we have 20 problems and all of them are super difficult and challenging, and we need $1 billion to solve all of that. But you can say, okay, if we start, what is the first one, which is the most important one, the most pressing one, and then we do that as far as we can, and we involve the citizens and we say, okay, what is the most important one? How can we get you on board in solving this problem? Let's say waste management or some really localized issue, and then you do that in one place. You see what works well, what doesn't work, you do it in another. So instead of doing a large scale, of course you have to do that as well. You need landfills, you need large scale developments in order to make other things work. But it needs to go all together. So there's no golden bullet, but there's no, it's not called silver bullet, but it all has to come together, I think.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Milena, you would like to add something?
Yes, it's more or less in the same line of, like, just it's trying to initiate a lot of smaller scaled projects, and which may lead to the bigger changes. Not all the small scale projects will succeed. It depends on the space, depends on the stakeholders, but we have to do both. We have to do the big scale projects as well as the small scale projects. And in terms of, I see now also a lot of questions coming in about, yes, okay, public space, it's also nice, very beautiful, but we deal with informal street vendors, we deal with very difficult ownership situations when we are not allowed to expand on a street space, and that kind of stuff. I will just illustrate quickly the same issues we had during our UPAT workshop in Durban, in the inner city renewal. And I have to say that the municipality of Durban had decided to, for instance, for the street vendors, they talk to them and ask them, can we at least then provide you with a space when you can store your goods? So you don't store your goods also on the street, you just sell them, but there is some kind of central place when you can store your goods, pick up and sell. So placemaking asks for a lot of innovation and a lot of innovative thinking as well, dealing with what you have and dealing with the complexities you have in a very clever way. So that's why I like it so much. It's a very innovative tool.
Thank you. So we have a question, another question from the attendees, from Inda Jilang from KOTA Cirebon. I would like to ask you to activate your video, and maybe you can now come to the floor and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Didier.
Yes.
Thank you
Very
for
good.
time. Following the discussion, yes.
Good.
Following the discussion on the informal settlements before, I understand that being illegal and informal settlements is different. But however, we understand in Indonesia most of our settlements are informal because planned regions are coming decades after our independence, only in the 90s or 80s. So most of the problems in Indonesian cities that I saw also in chat rooms are, what about the illegal settlements, those on riverbanks, in coastal areas, under the bridges? They are, of course, most of the time are illegal. The land are owned by the state or legacy from the royal families. And they are in the slum dwellers are in high risk of climate impacts like droughts, floods. So our good faith is to rearrange the city to save them from the climate impacts and to make to alleviate this slum settlement without doing the inhumane thing, if you will. So how do we do the right thing without pushing them to the outskirts, but also housing the homeless and managing our city in a good human way, and considering the climate impacts of those areas?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think the question is very clear, and it has been mentioned several times also in the chat, related to the the problem people occupying places of the city, which are also property of the state and the municipality, etc. This is a question, I don't know, who would like to answer this question?
I think Mr. Chark or Ms. Mahak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chark, would you like to?
If Mr. Chark would have a solution for this, I think we would have many less informal settlements around the world, or problems around the world.
Yes.
As said before, there is no one solution for it. There are a lot of different approaches which we can go for. And it really also depends on a case-to-case basis, because maybe sometimes the place is owned by somebody else, but you can exchange the land with somebody else. You were talking about royal land, so there's a completely different stakeholder involved in that as well. Sometimes you can protect places from natural disasters. Sometimes you have to relocate. So there's no one-fits-it-all solution. But I think the most important part is dealing with it in one way or another. So you cannot ignore them. You cannot forcefully evict them and just try to cover up the problem, which happens a lot of times everywhere as well. But you have to deal with it, and you need to find a way, and the way will be probably a combination of many different small-scale approaches directly with everyone who is involved. Because also, let's say you have a lot of times you have poor people very close to very rich people, because the poor people are working for the very rich people. So you have this strange dynamic in cities that a lot of times these two things come very close together. The rich people don't want the poor people right next to them. They would rather have a golf course or something there. So you have a lot of interests which are involved in different projects, and you have people who would have a higher land value because they are neighboring these areas. Maybe they would say, well, we will pay, or we will contribute something. There are projects like this where they're contributing to a social housing development in the same vicinity, because they don't want them there. And then you have maybe something from the public, and you have some others. So it's really case specific and really depends on each situation, and there is no perfect solution in any way.
There is no perfect solution, and it is also a process. And this is also the question, where are you starting? What are the first points you want to target, etc. But Mahak, maybe you have also, would you like to add something?
I think Talk already covered, but yeah, two big key points in that would be informality, like you're saying, the population who's living along the rivers, or the homeless, or the people who are living in on royal lands. So first of all, we have to look at all these different forms of informality as different interactions that these people have with their land and the surroundings. So we cannot compare the solutions we are proposing for a river settlement or to the ones that are living on the royal lands. That would be the first priority. And the second would be communication to reduce the friction, because in every project we have multiple stakeholders. And if the agency who is trying to relocate or rehabilitate people who are living in, say, disaster prone areas are not communicating the reason they want to communicate, the reason why they want to relocate, then it would produce friction in the minds of people that whatever the government is trying to do may be in the interest of the government or some other private agency. So there has to be a sort of balance, that there is a win-win for both ends, the people as well as the government.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mahak. I have a long list of questions, and I don't know where to start to continue. This is very interesting. I have a lot of questions related to environmental quality, environmental improvement. So the relationship between placemaking and waste management, for example, or the relationship between placemaking and water quality. I think this is a very crucial issue. I have also several other questions, the link between TOD and poverty reduction. This is also, it was mentioned in the chat also. And also the urban poor. This is also a relation, so what to do with the urban poor, but I think it has been discussed already. But I would like to ask you, and Mahak, now you are here in the front. So the question about waste management, water quality, and placemaking, can you make it clearer to everybody?
Okay, so again, whenever we talk about the water management, waste management, or placemaking at a city level, there are different layers to it. One, how are we planning for that at a city level, and then at various spatial levels within the city. So we cannot use the same solution that we are opting for planned settlements as the solution that can be implemented for informal settlements, because planned settlements are built on areas which have already been supplied or laid out the infrastructure to manage these facilities, whereas informal settlements are coming in areas which may not have these facilities, but then you're trying to provide in bits and pieces these basic amenities to people. So there has to be a sort of decentralized management of collecting the waste, of transporting the waste, of treating the waste, and then ultimately disposing or reusing this waste. Because yeah, even at a city level, you cannot take each spatial area or each population sector as a unified or a uniform entity. It has to be identified as a heterogeneous mix and amalgamation of people and places.
Thank you, Mahak. I would give 1 minute to Milena, and then we are going to close the Q&A session. As you know, all your questions will be replied, so we will store it, and then. But Milena, please.
Yes, I will fill my 1 minute with anecdote, or it's not really an anecdote. It's something we had during the World Urban Forum, Didier, when we were giving also the training for the mayors together with UN Habitat. And there was one mayor who stepped up to us and said, like, I have this problem with illegal waste, built waste dumping into the rivers of my city, and many canals which are beautiful, and poor people live there, but others are coming from other places and dumping there. So one of the suggestions we made is like to use placemaking to start to just make one part of that river bank clean and nicely maintained together with the neighborhood, which will keep eye also on all the illegal dumping. And at the moment when place is cleaned, when place is maintained, when people are there, are using it for the local festivals, for the women's gatherings, for a local school, then no one is going to dump there anymore, you know. So it's that's this first start of the snowball effect, and then you move on and you move on and you move on.
Yep.
So it's there are definitely ways to do that, and as Chark said, it's also very site specific, and I would like to underline again, you have to really be innovative and look at the local context.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. So the waste brings waste. If you have waste in a place, there is a tendency that you bring that other people the idea that they could also bring waste at this place.
Yep.
This is yes. So further materials related to this session are available online. So you will have access to the papers. You will have access to the reviews, to the articles, and also within this presentation you have also the possibility to have references you can download. And again, as every time, these are our contact details, and also for the Climate Resilient and Inclusive Cities project. So we have to close this session now, and we will meet again in, I think, about 15 minutes. And please log in again with your name and your city. And let's continue the discussion during the next session. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention, and see you later.